All right, so continuing on with the Mystery Babylon the Great. We talked briefly about how it coincides along with us during this, similar to the Mystery of Iniquity, this Babylonian system, which had its roots way back with Babylon in the Old Testament, and it's continued along and really seems to be growing in prominence over the last 2,000 years. And like the Mystery of Iniquity, we'll see it culminate into something that's great and considered a mystery during the tribulation. So I'll pick it up in Revelation 17:3, and it says, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast." Now, obviously, we know it's a woman. She's called a woman 6 times in this passage, so there's no doubt that this is a woman that's riding the beast. And I think it's important because in the Bible, churches and religious systems are pictured as women. I thought this was kind of interesting that God uses women as a picture of a religious system or a church, whether good or bad. Could be a good woman or a bad woman. But we see, like, obviously we know that the true church is pictured as a faithful virgin bride in 2 Corinthians 11:2. "For I'm jealous over you with a godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." So the faithful church is pictured as a woman. A local church, John refers to a local church as an elect lady in 2 John 1:1 and 5. He says, "The elder unto the elect lady and her children." And this letter, it was addressed to a local church. So even like a local church is pictured in Scripture as a type of woman. And he also refers to a sister church as an elect sister. So we see there's a pattern in the Bible where it's very clear that religious systems are pictured as a woman. Hence, we see this woman on the beast, and we can deduct that this is a picture of some sort of a religious system, that there's beliefs and doctrines tied into it. In Revelation 12, we see the woman in the wilderness who's fleeing the dragon, and it identifies her children as those that keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Christ. So we know that this woman represents like true believing Israel, and in particular Jerusalem, because the children have come out of Jerusalem as her children. And in Galatians 4, even Paul makes a reference there to the Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of us all. So, and you can see why, a lot of religions have these pictures of women representing them. And those Israelites that were fleeing, the children of the woman fleeing, they were identified by their faith, as different than the rest of the Jews that were not fleeing from the city and fleeing from persecution, that were going along with the whole religious system. Those ones in particular were centered out because of their faith, which is pictured as a woman. And then even you guys remember Jezebel from the Old Testament, just a wicked, evil queen. Well, obviously she was long dead, but in Revelation 2:20, the scriptures say that there's the woman Jezebel that's influencing their church services. "Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols." So again, it's a woman who's influencing what they believe and leading people astray and leading them to sin. And Jesus uses the example of the woman with the leaven. In Matthew 13:33, another parable, "Spake he unto them, the kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened." And what does leaven picture in the Bible?
Sin.
Right. So leaven is a picture of sin. So when Jesus is giving this illustration, and he's talking about like the kingdom of heaven, and he's saying it's like, a woman who's, hiding leaven, putting leaven into something, and he's comparing it to sin. If you put sin into something, it's going to spread and corrupt your pure, true faith. And he uses a woman picturing that. So I thought that was interesting. I hadn't really ever put that all together, that women in the Bible picture like religious systems. And obviously we know in the Old Testament, Israel was considered, God called her like an adulterous wife. We have the true church, who's the virgin bride. Israel is the unfaithful wife that committed adultery, Ezekiel 16:33, but as the wife that committed adultery, which takes strangers instead of her husband. So he's accusing Israel of committing adultery on him. So the harlot that we see in Revelation 17 is the opposite of the true church. The true church is the faithful, true believers, trusting in the one true God. And this woman is the culmination, it's the epitome of the false religions and all these other beliefs and belief systems that have just spread throughout the world. And she's said to be the mother of them all. And we looked again last week at how that all started in Babylon, that it started in one place and just spread out and multiplied. And even if you want to apply that to the Catholic Church alone has created so many different branches and denominations that have branched off from the Catholic Church. The original Catholic Church that we looked at last week started in 313 AD with Constantine, and he married the church to the state, and it became the official state religion. But then later on, when Rome fell and split into Western, Eastern Rome, Eastern with Constantinople, you ended up with an Eastern Orthodox version of the Catholic Church, and they had their own popes and their own hierarchy and people leading, and you had the Western branch. And then all the way up until the 1600s with the Reformation, you got all these Protestant branches. You got the Lutherans and Episcopalians and just all these other people that came out of the Catholic Church, and they did correct a lot of things about the false doctrine the Catholic Church was teaching, but they didn't get rid of it all. A lot of them still held to infant baptism and doing the Mass and putting some trust in sacraments and works and stuff like that. So they were still teaching some false doctrines that are abominations, and they're like children of that mother church. So we see this woman in Revelation 17:3, and she's sitting on the beast. And it's interesting because I've seen, like looking at commentaries and stuff, most people view this as, well, she's obviously riding on this beast, so we see this religious system that's like directing the governments of the world and controlling things. But I think if you just look at the text literally, it only says that she's sitting on the beast. It doesn't say that she's riding it. If you're just sitting on it, it doesn't imply control. It doesn't look like she's actually steering the beast where it's going to go. It's more like she's going where the beast goes. So ultimately when this happens and this vision is fulfilled in the tribulation, I believe this woman, this religious system, this economic system, it's not going to be controlling the Antichrist. The Antichrist is going to be controlling the religion. And ultimately, the Antichrist is going to want all worship and all the religion to focus on him. So I think he's using this system and this whole religious system, which will probably be a one world religion, including the Catholic Church, that'll play into the whole economic power that the Antichrist gathers to himself during the tribulation. As we know, it's the false prophet who rises up that actually comes up with the mark of the beast, and not being allowed to buy or sell unless you have the mark. So that whole system comes from the false prophet, who's like the head religious figure when you get to that satanic trinity of the...
It's almost like that's like the Antichrist's bride, kind of. Because
Yeah,
like
maybe.
we the church are Christ's bride, and it's like
Yeah,
Satan has bride for
yeah,
the
and that's
Antichrist. It seems like.
and that's one of my points is that just the same way God and Jesus came, they have their own true church and they're believers and they're followers. Satan's got his church, and if you're not part of the true church, you're part of the false church by default. So there's no membership fees or anything. It's real easy to get in. Just don't believe in the true gospel. So I think things are going to change a little bit in the tribulation, because today we do see where religion can control governments. We looked last week at some of the influences that the Roman Catholic Church had when they joined with Rome, and then like we saw the Catholic Church and Mussolini and Hitler and the Nazis, and how they ended up becoming their own individual nation with the Vatican, with the Lateran Treaty in 1929 with Mussolini. So we see that the Catholic Church actually has controlled governments. There were kings that literally couldn't be a king unless the Catholic Church approved of it. There were kings that would decide, if they decided something against the Catholic Church, they would excommunicate that king, unless he like repented and like did what the Catholic Church wanted. So through history, we've seen religion controlling politics, but it looks like it's going to switch around in the tribulation, because then the Antichrist is going to have such a powerful political coalition that he's going to use religion instead of religion using the government, and he'll have control of it, and the religion will be fine with it because the religion is going to be boosted up by this whole system. Kind of like how the Roman Catholic Church has done that through history. They made a deal with the Nazi Party, like, hey, we won't say anything, against your plans and agenda and what you're hoping to accomplish, as long as you make us, the official religion of Germany. So they're actively involved in like working with these governments, and during the tribulation, with this ultimate coalition of the Antichrist, bringing a one world united government, primarily with the 10 kingdoms that will form the heart of his coalition. The church will be happy to get on board with that, because they're going to be very powerful and strong, and they'll be like, because the church is strong, they have a lot of followers. There's a lot of faithful believers out there that are lost and believing whatever they believe, and for the church to come along and say, hey, we'll tell our billions of followers that you're the right way and that they need to follow you, as long as you let us be the official religion of your one world government. So you can see how they kind of go hand in hand, and they want to work together. So she's supported by the beast, and she goes where he leads. So at this time, you see the Antichrist is using the religious system. And the beast is scarlet colored, which is a color of honor, kingship. It was interesting in Daniel 5:7, remember when the Nebuchadnezzar had the crazy dream and he couldn't remember it, and he was trying to figure out, like, he was calling for the astrologers and false prophets and stuff to try to explain what his dream was, and he actually offered a reward. And he said, the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the soothsayers, and the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. So this color scarlet, and there's other examples that it seems to indicate some sort of an honor or glory. So if whoever could interpret this king's dream would get this scarlet cloak or clothing, that would indicate like this is a person that's exalted, they're to be respected. So it seems to indicate this woman who's clothed in scarlet, somebody, the Antichrist, his kingdom, is clothed her in scarlet and given her this like position of honor, that she's to be respected. And also, remember when Jesus was being crucified, they put a scarlet robe on him, and that was like a mocking type thing, where it was like, oh yes, here's our king, here's the one to respect. We see that the scarlet is a mark of respect. So moving on, we also see that this beast is full of names of blasphemy. We looked at this briefly a few weeks ago when we were looking at the number of the beast and the mark of the beast. And it's just interesting that this false religious system, it doesn't just have one name. That's why I don't want to just label it as the Catholic Church, because it's full of names. You know, it'll probably be a combination of Catholicism and Islam and Hindus and Buddhists and, you know, other cultic religions and even Satanists and Zoroastrians, and it's just full. Like whatever name you can think of that isn't the true religion, every false religion out there, that's one of the names of blasphemy. And just to keep plugging away at the Catholic Church there, those are different titles of the Roman Catholic Church. The Vicar of God's Son equals 666. The head of clergy equals 666. That whole Vicar of Christ, I think, adds up to 666. Just you see this mark, you know, this number popping up a lot when you get into the Catholic titles. Moving on to Revelation 17:3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So some thoughts about the 7 heads. The first part of the chapter explains this vision that he sees and describes this woman on the beast. But then a little later, the angel that's with John, you know, is like, hey, why are you like wondering so much? Let me explain to you what all these things mean. And he goes on to actually detail like what the different parts of this vision mean. So in Revelation 17:9, and here's the mind which hath wisdom, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. But before we talk about the 7 mountains, does that sound familiar to anybody? And here is the mind which hath wisdom. Does that sound familiar?
Is it like a Proverbs? Does something to do with Solomon?
Nope. We saw it a little while ago in Revelation 13. And I think this is an interesting correlation because in Revelation 13:18, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So in Revelation 13:18, it says, here is wisdom, and then it tells us this number that's connected with the mark of the beast. And we've got the number, and we're all scratching our heads trying to figure out, how does it fit? Like, we know the number, and we know that there's going to be a mark, but like, what's the name? Because it talks about it's the number of a man. So like it's like it gives us this big piece of information, this number 666, but we don't know how it applies. We look for it, we see it connected with a lot of different things, but I think that's something that's going to be revealed during the tribulation. I think when the Antichrist appears, it's going to be very obvious. It's going to be like, oh, so that's what the 666 is all about. I get where that's coming from now. And it has something to do, like, to have wisdom to figure that out. So we're talking about Mystery Babylon, which I had mentioned, it could be a mystery that we can't fully understand until the tribulation actually gets here, and the people that are in the tribulation are going to all of a sudden see like, oh yeah, that's wisdom. That's what the number means. Well, I think it's almost like the way he presents it here, like here's the mind that hath wisdom. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of debate. This topic has been a little difficult to study because there's so many different viewpoints. There's so many different things that actually are very interesting the way they match up, but they're not like, nothing's perfect. You can always have questions about them. So kind of like the 666, where it's like, oh, is it Obama? You know, was it Clinton? Is it, you know, whoever? But like, we just don't know who it is, but we know we're looking for that number. But we know that this Babylon the Great is on this beast with 7 heads, and the heads are called 7 mountains. But I'll tell you the basic theories on that. So Rome, obviously, very popular one because it talks about 7 mountains, and we know later in this chapter it says that the woman is a city. So there's going to be some sort of a city, and it's on 7 mountains. Now Rome has 7 hills. They're not exactly mountains, but they are 7 elevated areas and they're obvious. I mean, you can see them. It's not like they're just little tiny hills or anything, but it is a city that is built on 7 hills. And at the time of writing this, it was the most powerful city in the world in John's day. It was the center of commerce, and the Roman Empire pretty much ruled all of the whole Middle East of the time, and up into what we know as Europe and South. So it could be could have an application there. It could be Rome. The Vatican's in Rome. Oh, I don't know if it.
It says.
Oh, it's up in it says top left up there. Right at the top where the Tiber River is there. Top. It says Vatican. So that could be. Some of my questions about it is that when we see other descriptions about this Babylon the Great, it talks about it being this huge commercial center, like just massive production of luxury goods and things that are being made and shipped. And when God eventually brings his judgment on it, the merchantmen are all out in their ships in the ocean, and they're watching the smoke ascend, and they're all like mourning because this great center of production has been destroyed. And I don't see like Rome actually being like a major center of like physical goods production.
China.
Obviously it's a cultural thing. Yeah, China. A lot of hills in China. But I'll look more into that next week. Some people say it's Washington, D.C. Did you guys know that Washington, D.C. was called Rome when they first made it?
Yeah, I heard that.
It was actually called Rome when they first made it, and it actually has 7 hills in it. It's got Capitol Hill, Meridian Hill, Floral Hills, Forest Hills.
It's also got the 666 monument.
Yeah, it's got you got the that big obelisk like we saw that was made in Babylon, and it's in Rome. And the Potomac River was once called Tiber Creek, which is named after a river in Rome. So I don't think it's Washington, but it's just one of the theories that are out there. Interesting that it was actually called Rome, and it has 7 hills. I've heard some people teach that it's going to be Jerusalem, and I think the reason for that possibly is because in Revelation 18:24 it says, and in her, talking about Babylon, was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and of all them that were slain upon the earth. Most people use that as applicable to Rome, because the Catholic Church has committed so much persecution of Christians and anybody that didn't hold to their doctrines over time. But I don't see that it can be Jerusalem, because there is going to be a great judgment on Babylon. In Revelation 18, 21 to 23, it says, a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. So the destruction of Babylon is going to be so complete that it's never going to rise again. It's going to be completely destroyed. It's very clear there's never again, like nobody's ever going to light a candle in this city. Nobody's going to play an instrument in this city. Nobody's ever going to get married again in this city. It's a complete destruction. So why can't that be Jerusalem?
It hasn't been destroyed. Or it won't be.
You know, how come? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there just to make conversation. If anybody, like, you know, this is saying
It doesn't get destroyed during the tribulation. Jerusalem.
right. There's a lot of persecution, and there's a great earthquake that splits the city in three parts. But what happens after the tribulation?
Jesus rules and reigns from that location.
From Jerusalem. Jerusalem is restored, and Jesus reigns from there. And there's like rivers of water, and it's like the centerpiece of the millennial kingdom. So we know that Jerusalem can't be Babylon, just because the description of the destruction of it is so permanent and complete. I wonder if that's hail. Sounds kind of hard. First thunderstorm of the year.
Feels brand new car, right? Fuel insurance.
So I kind of came up with my own thoughts, possibly, just looking at the 7 hills. To God, wouldn't the continents be hills or mountains, essentially? There's 7 continents. Kind of matches up nice. And it talks about that she sitteth upon many waters, right? There's a lot of waters around the continents. And I'm not saying this is absolutely it, but I see this Babylon, it's got to be bigger than just one city. And we saw the original Babylon when Nimrod built that city. It wasn't just one city. It was a metropolitan. It was multiple cities that all worked together to become such a great conglomerate of cities. So just throwing it out there, what if to God 7 mountains are the 7 continents? And this system is going to be a global world system, especially because we're in the Gentile time now, where the Old Testament, everything was focused on just that one little spot of land, Israel, where now that we're in the time of the Gentiles, and we know that the many waters refers to peoples and nations and tongues and tribes. So this woman is sitting upon many waters. So if it was just Rome, I mean, that's not like a ton of water. I mean, there's definitely water there, but maybe this is an indication that this is going to be a global system, that this great Babylon religious and commercial system is going to be a global, widespread thing. Possibly. So it does go on to say also that this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. In Revelation 17:10, it interprets it as 7 kings. And like the rest of these scriptures, there's so much debate as far as who these kings are. Depends on your eschatology, like what you believe about the end times. If you believe that there's going to be a millennial reign of Christ, you're going to interpret things one way. If you believe that the millennium already happened or we're in the millennium, you're going to have to interpret it a different way. So one of the things people think are the popes, because I had mentioned the Lateran Treaty in 1929, where Mussolini gave the Vatican official political independence, and the Vatican became its own country. And since then, we've had 8 popes, and so people are trying to match up, like, oh, well, the popes, you know, some people say the pope's going to be the Antichrist, some people say the popes are these kings. You know, the title of the Pope, Vicar of Christ, equals 666. So back in 1139, there was a Catholic saint, Saint Malachi, and he had a vision, and he predicted the next 112 popes and what their names would be. And he said that the 112th pope will be the Antichrist and bring about the destruction of Rome. Right now, the current pope is Francis, and he's number 112. So I don't know if there's anything to it, but he made a prophecy that there was going to be 111 popes, or 112 popes, and the last one was going to be the Antichrist to bring about the destruction of Rome. And it's interesting because this Pope Francis has really been rocking the religious world. He's breaking tradition with a lot of things that the Catholic Church has held to and taught. He, in 2019, he signed an actual covenant with Islam to try to bring together their religions and not be, so at odds with each other. He's pro-homosexual, which is very contrary to the Catholic Church. Is very defined on how they define like marriage and what a marriage should be. So he came out and said if two people love each other and they're the same sex, who am I to judge them? So and that's very much against what the Catholic Church has traditionally been. He also is striving for a one world religion, actively. He handpicked 13 cardinals that have the job of helping to bring about a one world religion. So we can see that he's definitely involved in end times type stuff. So I don't know if this vision that this Malachi guy had, but it's just kind of interesting because things are lining up with what this last pope is doing. He declared that there's no hell. He said that when lost people die, they just disappear, which is a big break from Catholicism too, because they've always taught a lot about hell. And he officially changed the Lord's Prayer. We talk about power, right? He changed, the Lord's Prayer. You know how it says, "And lead us not into temptation"? Well, he reasoned, why would God ever lead us into temptation? So he no longer praised that. He changed it to let us not fall into temptation. So the Catholic Church actually has the authority to change the Word of God. We think we have the Word of God here in our Bible. Well, not if you're a Catholic, you don't, because the Catholics can just, no, that shouldn't say that. We're going to change it. So, are the 7 kings 7 popes? I don't think so, but that's one of the popular theories out there.
Did you see how they were all wearing, a lot of them were wearing red?
Yeah, we'll get into the colors. I'll talk about it. Some people say, and these are people that want to believe that the tribulation already happened. They say that the 7 kings were the 7 rulers of Rome. Rome had 7 kings. And 753, about a guy named Romulus actually founded the city of Rome. He wanted to create a big city. So he essentially said, put out a message. Anybody who's a criminal or wanted for something, any scoundrels, come to our city and we'll completely ignore all that and give you a new fresh start. So the whole city was flooded with the worst of the worst, murderers and just thieves, and they had this huge city full of wicked people, and that was the foundation of Rome. And obviously a lot of drama with kings killing kings. But after the 7th king, after he was killed, he was the last king of Rome, and Rome actually became a republic, kind of like the United States. It's a republic. It became a representative government. It was the first actual republic in the world. So some people say that the 7 kings could be the 7 kings of Rome. But the dispensational view is that the 7 kings refer to the 7 world empires. And this is most commonly taught and accepted with our type of dispensational view that lines up with our eschatology, with end times and prophecy, where we have Egypt, Assyria, Babylon. We get into, remember Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon had the dream of the big statue with the gold head and the silver chest and the bronze. That lines up, it begins at Babylon and includes then Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. Remember I told you Rome split. So we got the 2 legs that represent Rome, and the legs are of iron, which was the symbol of Rome. And then today, we essentially don't have Rome anymore, because Rome fell and it broke apart into a bunch of smaller nations and spread out. And then we get into these 10 toes that came out of Rome. And these 10 toes are going to be, when we get into the 10 crowns, 10 kings, they're going to be these rulers, these nations that actually came out of Rome after they were conquered. But I won't get too deep into all that because that can take a long time. It's a study for another time. But generally, those seven mountains, Scripture mountains, do represent like kingdoms, and they match up really well with the 7 kingdoms that we've actually had in the history of humankind. The woman being on the beast with 7 heads, we can see that she spans the entire history of mankind. She was there for the Egyptian Empire. She was there in Babylon. She was there for Medo-Persia. And it's just noteworthy that in each of those 7 kingdoms, they all had a supreme like female goddess that they worshipped. In Egypt, it was Isis. In Assyria, this D-Day something. In Babylon, here we got Ishtar. And we talked about Ishtar. So each of those 7 kingdoms all had one like high goddess deity that they worshipped. And it really, if you look at it today, who's the highest like female goddess figure in the world that's worshipped by millions of people? It's Mary, right? So it's like each kingdom had a female figure, and it just kind of goes along perfectly with this woman that's on the beast and this woman representing a false religious system. And we get into the 10 toes. There's just, so many different views on that. I'm not going to go into all that, but the 10 toes, when it talks about the 10 toes, in Revelation 17:12-14, when it's being interpreted, it says that those 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings for 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords, King of kings, etc. But these 10 kings, they don't have a kingdom yet. When the Roman Empire fell apart and scattered, they became other nations, typically that's scattered into Europe, Western Europe. So you get like Germany and Spain and France. These are all nations that kind of like came out of the Roman Empire, and at the end times during the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to bring possibly these countries back together again under kind of a revived Roman Empire. And because right now they're not kings, these countries are they have representative governments. There's not like a king of Spain or that just has like absolute dominion. They have to go through, they have their councils and houses and representatives and voting. They don't have like just kings ruling over them. But during this time of the tribulation, I think the Antichrist is going to maybe offer them some sort of political power that, like if you support me with your country, I'll give you kingship over your country. Like people of Spain, if whoever's leading Spain at the time, you completely throw your country behind me and support me, and I will make you king over Spain, and everything you say goes. So they don't have a kingdom yet as a king, but they will reign as kings 1 hour with the beast. So it doesn't seem like a very long time to reign. Most commentators say that it's a short time period, maybe not literally an hour, but if you just look up 1 hour in the Bible and just kind of see the different places that shows up, that's kind of an interesting study. So it says that they're all of one mind. The word one in this context is uni, which is like United Nations. Heard some allusions to that. So just one chart that I found of many, that these 10 countries that came from the Roman Empire, and even it's interesting, prophecy in Daniel, it talks about the 10 kings, and 3 of them in Daniel were predicted. There were these 3 horns were actually rooted up and destroyed, and that was fulfilled when these 3 groups, the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths, were destroyed, fulfilling the prophecies in Daniel. But most of these, it's going to be central down like Western Europe, and we saw the verse about how it's the people of the Antichrist that destroyed the temple, and we know that was the Romans that destroyed it. So that's why we say it'll be like a revived Roman Empire, combining like the countries that came out of the Roman Empire. I don't know if you guys have heard about the Club of Rome. And it's kind of like in the conspiracy stuff. It's this group of super powerful, rich people, like the Rockefellers and and they actually meet, and their whole goals are like population control, New World Order. They actually have the world divided up in 10 kingdoms. That's like their plan, to divide up the world into like 10 kingdoms that all, are united under one like worldwide government. But it's just another possibility. So full blasphemy, we talked about that. A lot of names, false religions. I don't have to go upon that. I'm not even sure why that's in there because I already covered it. So purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, obviously fits to a T the Catholic Church. They're all about scarlet and purple. The purple ones are bishops and the scarlet ones are cardinals. And cardinals are red, right? Because of the birds, they're red. So you can remember like scarlet cardinals, they're cardinals in the Catholic Church. What color is missing? There's a very prominent primary like color that's missing. It's always red and blue, red and purple and gold, and there's no blue. Ever notice, like with all these religious figures, there's no blue. You know what blue represents? Blue represents God's law. It's very interesting that these false religious leaders don't put any blue. In Numbers 15, that speak unto the children of Israel and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments, that they might look on the fringe and on their borders a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that you may look on it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them. So God told them, put blue on your garments so that when you see that blue, you know to remember my law and to be obedient to it. And we don't see blue in the Catholic Church. Talked about her being all decked out with like precious stones and pearls. Interesting, because Satan in Ezekiel 28, when it was talking about when he was in Eden, the Garden of God, and every precious stone was like covering the sardius, the topaz, and the diamond, and the beryl, and the onyx, and so forth. So here we see Satan himself was covered with all kinds of stones. And here we see these religious leaders and this woman with these precious stones. We can just see the picture how this thing's the progression of the false religion hanging on to all these things like the colors and the stones. And we see that she has a golden cup in her hand. And so much can be said about the Catholic cup. This cup is full of abomination and filthiness. The Catholic cup, when they do the Mass and they take that cup, they're actually making an offering. Think about like through the whole Old Testament. People would bring offerings, like the Jews, when they're right, they would bring offerings to God. But people that were pagans and didn't believe in the true God, they had their own forms of offerings. They would bring their sacrifices and they would offer them to their God in some way to please it. And most of the time it was some sort of a blood sacrifice. The Catholics take this wine and they offer it to God, who then does some, mumbo jumbo and turns it into a literal body and blood of Christ. And we see in the Old Testament, it talks about this cup being full of abominations. The false sacrifices in the Old Testament, these sacrifices to other gods, they were an abomination to God. In Deuteronomy, they provoked him to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations. Provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to gods. Another one, and you have seen their abominations. So these false sacrifices are an abomination. So this Catholic cup, this offering, is considered an abomination. So this cup is full of abominations, and God considers it like it's an abomination what they're doing, and they're offering it to devils. So the Catholic Church believes that the Mass changes the wine and the wafer into the literal body and blood. They call it's this ongoing bloodless sacrifice of Christ. They literally repeat the sacrifice of Christ at every Mass, every day, around the world. It's a perpetual sacrifice. We know that Jesus said that he offered himself once for all and then sat down at the right hand of the Father. His sacrifice is done. But the Catholic Church is literally, in their minds, offering Christ up again. Every time they do the Mass, they're offering up Christ as a sacrifice. Human sacrifice, long history of human sacrifice. I won't get too deep into it, but we see multiple times in the Bible where it calls out people that have made their children or their sons to pass through the fire, burnt their children in the fire, made their sons and daughters to pass through the fire. Human sacrifice has been like a center of a lot of the wicked pagan heathen worship. So Satan loves death, and he's put it into people's minds that somehow killing a person is going to somehow appease whatever God that you're trying to make an offering to. So the Roman Catholic Church practices this ongoing human sacrifice. So when we take the Lord's Supper and we take the wine and the bread, we're doing it to remember his completed sacrifice and what he did for us. What they do, and I think I think Satan is behind that, because we celebrate the Lord's Supper as a completed thing, and it's not a sacrifice anymore. The Catholics believe it's a sacrifice, and I think it's almost like Satan's way of remembering or celebrating the closest that he'll ever get to victory. When he had Jesus killed, that was probably like Satan's high point of his existence. And essentially, his church, the Satan Church, is celebrating, like reliving that sacrifice. Every time, it's like the centerpiece of that whole religion is killing God. And it's almost like Satan must just love that. Like, yeah, that's right. I can remember that. Like, we remember it as a completed sacrifice, and we're so thankful. Satan's probably like, yeah, I can't wait to get him for good in the end. And I'm going to get him in Armageddon. You know, you can just see, like, he's probably just behind that. And it's a celebration every time they do it for him, trying to, it's the closest he ever came to winning anything. So we know that this cup it's full of abominations and filthiness. We talked about how false religions and all the abominations of their actual sacrifices, but Rome itself is just, I don't even have to explain. I mean, it's all over the place in the news. We know how corrupt the garbage that goes on in the Catholic Church. Someone said that Rome has more prostitutes than any other city because there's more celibates than any other city. Just as an indication of just how wicked they are. In 2004 to 2011, Rome paid over $2.5 billion in abuse settlements. Another, the Catholic Church, when they took over, when they proselytized other nations or they went into other pagan areas, they didn't make the people give up their gods. They just said, oh, well, you worship Bridget, the Celtic goddess? Well, boom, now she's Saint Bridget. You can still pray to her. They didn't make these people repent and give up their pagan gods. They just changed them from a pagan god into a Catholic saint. One of my pictures didn't come out there. That the dude in the bottom there is Dionysius, who's actually a god of wine, and they converted him to Saint Denis. And supposedly he was beheaded for his faith, so that's why the thing came up there. So we also see that the name is written upon her forehead, publicly proclaimed on her forehead, kind of similar to the mark of the beast, similar to the mark of when God marks 144,000, when God marked the people to be saved in Israel when he was bringing judgment. It's just a common way where it's just clear and open. It's not hidden anymore. I think when this beast is revealed and the mark is revealed, like we see it more and more, things aren't hidden anymore. More and more people are just open and out there with what they believe and what their convictions are, and just having just blatantly on your forehead, just proclaiming to the world what you believe. So she's the mother of harlots, mother of all false religions, and all things sacrificed to these false gods are abominations. We're just about done here. The church, it talks about her being drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with a great admiration, just the statistics are staggering when you look at the possible number of people that the Catholic Church has killed. I mean, some estimates run as high as 100 million people throughout history that the Catholic Church is responsible for killing, either through persecutions, inquisitions, or just like flat out wars. I mean, they actually fought wars against like Islam and into the Holy Land, and they told all their Catholic followers, hey, if you want an instant ticket to heaven, skip purgatory, skip all the sacraments, you fight with us and go into the Holy Land and fight against the Muslims. And if you get killed, you'll instantly go to heaven. And like, just think of all the people that were just blindly following them and went to their deaths and didn't have the truth. And we'll talk about this sometime, this trail of blood. If you see that line along the bottom is the true church that was never part of the Catholic Church. You see where the church joined with Rome around 300 there, and then you see the split where you had the Greek Catholics on the east and the Roman Catholics on the west. And then towards the right, the Reformation, you see all those other branches that came out, the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists and the Church of England, the Methodists. But yet we were never part of the Catholic Church, so there was nothing for us to protest against. We're not Protestants because we're not protesting. We were never part of it. Those other denominations were part of the Catholic Church, but they didn't agree with everything, so they protested and became Protestants. But along the bottom here, the trail of blood is this line of true believing Christians from the early church that never compromised, never joined with that Church of Rome. The Novatians, the Paulicians, I can't really read them all, the Albigenses, the Arnoldists, ultimately like the Anabaptists, and ultimately the Baptists. So that's, it's important to know church history and like why, like where the Baptists come from. The Baptists didn't come out of the Catholic Church. They were part of that line of blood that never joined with it in the first place. So this is just a final note before we wrap up. It says that he wondered with great admiration. This is actually a point that some people attack the King James Bible on, because they'll say, how can that be? Here's this like wicked, vile thing, and yet admiration implies like a positive thing, right? Like if you admire something, it's like
John did.
yeah, John, when he saw it, he wondered with great admiration. So like these new translations, or I'll get to that, the meaning of the word admiration, obviously it's something like to wonder at, to marvel, amazement, astonishment. It's an approval, an adoration. It carries with it this like a very positive meaning when you admire somebody. If you got a secret admirer, it's a good thing. You got somebody admires you for something. There's only a few versions of the Bible that keep it as great admiration. The King James, obviously, the Douay-Rheims, which is a 1582 one, the Webster's 1833, Mace's NT 1729. So these really old versions of the Bible kept that. But new versions, instead of translating what the text says, they try to reason and think, well, that can't be right, because this is a wicked thing, and good old St. John would never be looking favorably at this wicked woman on the beast, so we got to change it. So all these new versions, they like rewrote it. They changed it to I was greatly astonished. I stared at her in complete amazement. I wondered greatly. I was very surprised when I saw her. So they try to change it. So instead of just giving you the words that God said, they want to interpret it as to like what God probably meant. And they'll criticize the King James, saying like, your King James has a big mistake in it. There's no way that he looked in a favorable way upon that beast and the woman. So just because you don't agree with what it says, that's not a reason to change the Word of God, to just try to fit what you think God's trying to say. Because the very next verse, the angel even says to John, like, why are you marveling? Why do you marvel at that? So that even kind of confirms that he was like looking at this woman on this beast with some sort of a admirable astonishment. So as King James believers, we want to know, like, well, I mean, why then? Like, how come he could be thinking like in a positive way? Well, if you consider the whole scene, like he just saw this, like the mystery has been revealed. The mystery Babylon the Great, finally fully revealed in all of its awful power, awful glory, that influence and strength and the gold and the silver and the stones. He's seeing this like amazing sight and the beast and the heads. So one thought is like he was wondering with great admiration at like how God was about to bring judgment on it, because the angel said, come with me and I'll show you the great horror and the judgment that's to come. So possibly he was like, maybe it was some sort of an admiration of God who's so powerful and so just that he's like going to actually destroy this amazing, powerful, whole beast thing, system, woman. So that's one theory. But another one is possible that John had just like seen this incredible stuff. And we know that 2 other times in the book of Revelation, John fell down and worshiped an angel. 2 different times, John was so overwhelmed with all the stuff that he was seeing that when the angel came to him, he just like fell down and started worshiping the angel. And the angel's like, no, I'm just another servant. You need to get up and I'll come with me and I'll show you more stuff. Don't worship me. So John is just a human being like us. I think when he saw this woman and the beast and the power and the glory and the influence and this mother of harlots and abominations, like possibly this whole thing was so powerful that even John standing there looking at it maybe almost started like admiring it, like, wow, I mean, that really is powerful. Like that wow, I can really understand why so many people have fallen into that. Like, they made like it was actually something when he was human, like us. I mean, if somebody gave us such a powerful revelation, I think we'd probably wonder too and be like, man, that's power. Like we wouldn't be able to really grasp it. So I think John just was probably a little overwhelmed and like admired it for its strength, for what it was. I mean, it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful world dominating force. And for him to like admire it just for its power and strength and how it's all interconnected and how Satan's whole plan from the very beginning is all culminating and coming together in this one revelation of this great mystery. I mean, why not admire it? Like just for what it is. It doesn't say he worshipped it or that he desired it or anything, but if you could admire something that's, so powerful that your brain doesn't know how else to respond. So all that just to say, just because it says admiration doesn't mean that that's a bad translation in the King James Bible. Our King James Bible is always right, and that's just one. That's how you can explain if anybody wants to criticize that.
Do you think possibly that as Satan was in the beginning with precious stones and like he must have been something that was admired because he held a special place.
Yeah.
And so if that's still part of, I don't know what he lost. I don't know if he got stripped of all his stones or what, but if he can be an angel of light and he can isn't he a very attractive man to look upon? Isn't there something that talks about his appearance being?
Well, I mean, it talks about the Antichrist being like a nobler or stronger looking one than other people. Like people are going to see him as some sort of a ruler, but I don't know that there's.
But this was more looking at like a.
I don't know if there's not like a physical description of Satan as far as like what his features are.
Although this doesn't have anything to do with looking at Satan, it has to be admiring.
Oh yeah. I'm looking at the woman and the beast, but this whole woman is like directly controlled, and it's Satan's masterpiece.
Do you think when John's looking at this thing, he's seeing a woman on a beast, or is he seeing into the future, and is he marveling with great admiration going forward in time and looking at a huge, powerful, like beautiful city. I mean, we're reading that it's a woman on a beast, but we're also understanding that it's not an actual woman; it's an
Well,
organized.
it gets interpreted. So possibly, maybe at the beginning of the vision, he sees this woman and the beast and the heads, but then the angel's like, "Come with me, and I'll show you what all these things mean." And then he says, the 7 heads are 7 mountains, and there's 7 kingdoms.
So what if he was marveling, or what if he had great admiration for like a beautiful,
Maybe he did. Maybe it was part of it. Maybe
powerful
maybe
city?
when it was connected, and he saw like, here's this woman on the beast, but here's what it literally is: this like a massive, this huge, powerful, global city that is just like in control of the whole world. So maybe he was like admiring
You gotta
it.
think about it. He's like you said, he's human.
Yeah.
And like imagine in that day and age seeing something that was so futuristic, like
Yeah, that's a
you can't even
possibility too.
fathom it. Like
Yeah, if he's
so, it's probably like you said, it was so powerful and different to them. Like it probably was just a split second of a thought of like admiration.
yeah, just
You're
like wow,
she
like
looks
that thing, like
amazing. Like I've never seen anything like this
yeah,
before.
like if you
Yeah.
took somebody from the New Testament church and let them see New York City with planes flying around and like traffic and cars, and they'd be like, whoa,
Yeah.
it'd be like, this is amazing. Like, I mean, and it's not that they're loving it or approving of it, but they're just seeing it for what it is. It's like this amazing like system. It's perfect. Everything works, and all the trains like are perfectly on time, and the cabs, and
Well, it even says,
You know?
I wondered with great
Yeah.
admiration. It doesn't say I looked with great admiration.
yeah.
See, because he was in
You know,
a
you
state
see-
of
he's
wonder.
He's
thinking,
like, wow, like this thing
what
is
is
this
this?
thing is like,
Wonder comes from wonderment. That's a good point.
So I mean, and it could have been like a positive thing, like in the sense of like this thing is huge, like this what a system. It's so powerful. It's like no wonder this thing has like caused so many problems. No wonder this woman has deceived so many people. It was like just acknowledging the power and strength and influence of it. So, but anyway, just in case anybody ever challenges your King James Bible on that.